Welcome to Estimate Activity Duration process under Project Schedule Management. Under this process, we try to estimate the activity duration that is required for the project. As you know, we have already created the WBS under Scope Management, and we define the activities based on the work packages. We sequence the activities, and now we are in the process of estimating the activity durations that is required for the project. As always, this process also requires certain inputs, and there are some tools and techniques that is used to estimate the activity durations for each and every activity, and the output would be activity estimates for the activity duration estimates. There are few factors to be considered in estimating durations. You as a project manager need to understand the law of diminishing returns. This is where your project might be operating at the most optimum level, and there could be a point, as per the law of diminishing returns, one more additional resource the marginal incremental benefit would be less. So you as a project manager would have to understand the law of diminishing returns to see whether your project is on optimal resource mix. And also you will have to understand that the number of resources, increasing the number of resources always may not improve the efficiency or not may necessarily decrease the activity duration, because after optimum mix, increasing the number of resources may reduce the learning curve or may pose additional risk, or there can be conflicts between team members. There should be an increased coordination is required between team members. Earlier it was a smaller team and it was more efficient, and in order to reduce the time of an activity, you would have increased the number of members or increase the number of developers in order to reduce the development time. But that might result in an excess time, because an increased number of coordination and additional risks between, and also the learning curve between team members. Also, as a project manager, you will have to understand the advancing technology that you are going to use in your particular project. Sometimes if you use an advancing technology, it might reduce drastically the number of resources that is required to do a particular activity. A high level of automation, maybe for testing, there are now automated testing tools. So therefore, by using automated testing tools, you might reduce the number of resources and also increase the efficiency, whereby the activity duration for UA for internal testing would take lesser time. So you as a project manager, these factors needs to be considered before estimating the proper activity durations for each and every activity. And also you as a project manager need to understand the culture of your organization, the other benefits, the fringe benefits, or the monetary benefits that the staff is given, so that the level of motivation is also important when you start calculating the activity duration. If your organization is bureaucratic and a less motivated staff, then of course you will have to factor in more duration in your activities. When you consider the inputs for this process, as I earlier said, the scope baseline will be one of the major inputs for this process, because it gives you the work breakdown structure. And also, as in the previous process, activity duration, in estimating activity durations, activity attributes will be a major input. The resource requirement will be also input, and also as a part of environmental factors, you will have to understand the government regulation, the industry standards that is required for you for this project. Say for example, you might have to take again some permissions from the government before doing some activity. So you might have to understand the regulations of the government in order to understand the time duration that they require for government approvals, so that you can embed that time duration when you estimate the activity duration in your project. And also, location of your team members is also an important factor, because maybe you are a part of a global company and you may have to access your resources worldwide to complete your project. Sometimes you may have to fly down your resources, or sometimes the technology that you use, as we discussed in the previous slide, might through a Skype call or through remote login, you might be able to, those global resources might be able to um, do the activities in your project. So location of your team members is also an important factor in order to estimate the activity of their flight time or whatever the travel time that needs to be considered. Also, through organizational processes, any historical information, any lesson learned repository will give you additional information required when estimating activity durations. In order to estimate the activity durations, as a project manager, you can use several types of estimating techniques. One is the analogous estimating technique. This is where you take historical data in order to estimate your current activity durations. This will be a less costly exercise and less time consuming, but however, using historical data to estimate the activity duration of your current project will be much less accurate and maybe due to your judgment. Another technique is maybe the parametric estimating technique. This is where you use an algorithmic method to calculate the duration of your project. For example, say an engineer, say you're on a project of laying fiber optic for a telecom company, and an engineer can only lay 25 meters of fiber cable per hour, and you will have to lay you're on a project to lay 1 kilometers of fiber. Then of course, to estimate through an algorithm, you can actually estimate for 1 kilometer divided by 25, it will require 40 hours for your engineers to lay the fiber cable. So likewise, using a parametric estimating, you can get a more accurate estimation of your activity duration. Also, there's a technique called the 3-point estimating technique. This is also known sometimes as the PERT technique. This is where you are unable to understand as a project manager the exact activity duration, the time duration that is required to finish the activity, and there is an uncertainty and a risk involved. In such case, you could use the beta distribution, which is also known as the PERT technique, which is a calculation between the most likely time, the most optimistic time, and the most pessimistic time. So once again, this is also known as a PERT technique. This is where the activity times are uncertain for you, and you cannot pinpoint it accurately, say that this is the exact amount of man days that is required. So there could be a probability, the most likely case, the activity can be finished between X number of days, or there can be a worst case scenario, the activity can be completed between Y number of days, and a best possible scenario that the activity can be completed within an Z number of days. In such a scenario, Well, of course, you could take an expected time to the beta distribution, the best possible time, 4 times into the most likely time, and the most pessimistic or the worst case scenario time divided by 6. Also, you as a project manager, when estimating the activity durations of your activity list, you could use other decision making techniques such as brainstorming. You can put your stakeholders and into a meeting and brainstorm and see how much each and every activity might time is required. Also, you can use techniques like Delphi technique or nominal group technique, which are all group decision making techniques in order to support your estimating activity. As a project manager, it is also important you to understand the concept of reserve analysis. In reserve analysis, there are two things. One is the contingency reserve. This is where you allocate a contingency reserve to identify risks. Contingency reserve is associated with known and unknown risks. For example, you know you have identified certain risks in an activity and you know those risks, and for that you can add on a contingency reserve. Say, for example, for a software development part of a particular model, you need 100 man days of software development resources. You might add a contingency buffer of another 10%. So usually a contingency reserve is a percentage of an estimated activity duration or a fixed number of periods. And it's important to understand that this contingency reserve is included in the schedule baseline of the project. Over and above that, there is a concept of management reserve. This is where that you reserve another amount of time duration for unknown unknowns, for unknown risks that you have identified. Say, for example, once after you start calculating your estimate activity duration for your project, you come up with 150 man days for your project, and thereafter you add another percentage, another 20 more days for any unforeseen risks of your project or any unforeseen risk for your scope of your project. So this is called the management reserve. But however, you will have to understand that management reserve is not included in the schedule baseline, and it will be a part of the overall project duration.